Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Okay, so Levinas. We are Totality and Infinity, Section 2D, Interiority and Economy, and we're finishing up that subsection, the dwelling, today. So in the last video we looked at habitation. That was the main idea there. The way habitation is this kind of distancing ourselves from that original mode of existence of Levinas's, that mode of enjoyment, living from, he calls it, where we are just totally immersed in life. There's no abstract intellection going on. There's no reflection. We are just immersed in the moment, in life itself, enjoying the things, enjoying life. And then habitation opens up the space for recollection, representation, so creating kind of a distance from ourselves, reflecting on the world, reflecting on ourselves. So this is a first step away from that original mode of enjoyment. And it was made possible by the feminine, by woman, who represented an alterity, an other, but an other that manifested not as a presence, that presence of dialogue, of language, but manifested via an absence, through a more intimate, welcoming, a field, we called it a field of intimacy, which didn't rely on language, didn't use discourse was the word. And we likened that to Martin Buber's I, thou, right? Okay. So we're going to just keep moving on with the story from there. And the first section we'll look at is called Possession and Labor. So labor for Levinas is basically the way that objects are taken up in plans and projects and related then to ends. So now we're entering, like I said, we've come out of this mode of pure enjoyment. We're entering this mode of reflection, recollection, abstraction, if you like, and kind of analyzing the world instead of just living in it. And when we do this, we take up things then, instead of being something I can just enjoy, something I use, not as a part of a project, but I directly enjoy it. It's not a means to an end. It's not even, I don't even see it as a chain in a kind of link whereby other things can happen as a result of it. I just enjoy the thing. And we liken this is Levinas's idea of his parallel with the Garden of Eden. So it's just a pure enjoyment. Now, though, labor is this first step away from that, where we are, instead of just using the thing and enjoying the thing, I'm putting it into a referential totality. Now it's not just something I can use. Now it's not something I can enjoy. Now it's something I can use in order to do something else. And that will lead to something else. And so now things are starting to, the world is kind of starting to take on shape in accordance with my desires, my projects, my plans. And Levinas says when this happens, when we start engaging with the world in terms of labor, objects are possessed. And that word possession has an important one for Levinas. So we're no longer in that immediate relation of enjoyment, which possesses without acquisition. So it's not like a kind of, it's not a real taking hold of a thing and placing it in the world and in a kind of a greater picture of what the world is and how things relate to each other. It's that pure mode of living from. And this is accomplished by the hand. So the hand is another important notion for Levinas here. And specifically grasping, taking, manipulating. That's what the hand does. That's what the hand is for. So the hand has an important role to play in this idea of possession, and therefore in this idea of labor, working. And not working in that sense of working, but working, labor in the sense of making everything, using things as part of a greater chain of a greater referential, I keep saying it, referential totality. It's from Heidegger, but essentially that's what Levinas is saying. Now we're getting into the referential totality of Heidegger, where things take on use value. They have use value. They have instrumental value. My quote: "The hand is the organ of grasping and taking, and the hand relating the elemental to the finality of needs constitutes things only by separating its take from immediate enjoyment, depositing it in the dwelling, conferring on it the status of a possession." So that's what I'm talking about here, this idea of possession for Levinas. Takes the thing, takes hold of the object and fits it into a plan, into a greater project, gives it an instrumental value. No longer is it something that I enjoy. Now it's something that has a purpose. It features as a stage in a greater plan that I have. It takes on utilitarian value. So the hand, though, first, the hand is not a sense organ in this sense for Levinas. The sense organ, hand as a sense organ, comes with that original mode of enjoyment, where we consume things, where we possess without acquisition, So we don't own things, they don't become mine and part of my project. They're just something I enjoy. That's the hand as a sense organ. But now we're talking about the hand as a mastery, a domination, a gathering or keeping in reserve. That's another expression he uses. So this idea that we're no longer in the moment enjoying the thing, but we're using it. It has value for later, perhaps. It now has a use value that we can quantify and that can be stored and can be used at a later date. So things are now, you see, things are getting away from this original mode of enjoyment, which was so important there for Levinas. And this also means that the thing, the object, is no longer what it is in itself. It no longer appears as the thing it is. Now it's mine, or it's someone else's, or it's part of this greater project. So it loses its value in and of itself. We don't see it as the thing that it is anymore. Now it becomes instrumental rather than having its own isness, if you like. And for Levinas, this means that the thing becomes quantifiable, exchangeable, and it's able to be reflected in terms, in kind of third-person terms. So we're able to give it a monetary value, for instance. So now it can be traded. We can give it a value and exchange it with things that have a similar value. And this is the root of money. And this, for Levinas calls this economy. So economy is starting to emerge from this derivative mode of being, if you like, this mode of labor, possession. And so economy is another important word for Levinas. It's a word that has carries a lot of meaning here. So that's what happens after habitation. Habitation results in labor, possession through the hand, and this leads to economy. Also, what this does is it neutralizes the uncertain future of the element. So remember we talked about that uncertainty, the element that is that lurks out there, that we can't identify as coming from anywhere. Things just, it's in a sense, it's too big for us to grasp in its entirety. So the uncertainty of the elemental was because its qualities lack substance. We can't get to the source. They just come to us out of the future from nowhere, as far as we can tell. But when we come to possession, now we're mastering this. We're overcoming this uncertainty. Possession masters, suspends, postpones the unforeseeable future of the element, its independence, its being. So now the object appears in relation to an end. And so this is an end towards me, towards myself, right? It's my end. So the end that I'm projecting here is towards myself, not towards a transcendence, not towards the absolute alterity of the other, for instance, or the world perceived under this this original mode of existence whereby the elemental is something we can't grasp. What we've done essentially is totalized the world. We've brought the world into a totality with us, centered on us, because it's centered on everything in the world is centered around my projects, my aims, my goals. And remember, we talked at the beginning that this is the only totality, the only alterity that isn't totalized, that remains in alterity, is the other person. The world, however, although it is an other at first, it ends up being totalized by us through this, exactly what Levinas is talking about, habitation, possession, economy. So the object now appears as in relation to an end. It's in a way it's tamed. We've tamed the object. We've tamed the world. That's what totalising does. Brings it into a relation with us, which we can now understand. We can grasp in its entirety. Things make sense. They fit into a bigger picture, a bigger framework. So this labor, possession, this gives the object substantiality. It gives it substance. We can now quantify it. We understand it. And that means that it removes the insecurity and the alterity. And this is how that uncertainty of the elemental is overcome. It's no longer a mystery. It's no longer something that the future is no longer, or the world, objects, they don't come to us from nowhere. Now we can fit everything into this picture that we've created, we've formed, because we've turned everything towards ourselves. We've made ourselves the locus from which everything gets its meaning. And that's what it is to totalize the world. The only other thing I want to note regarding that quote is the term postponement. That is an important word, and it's going to come up in the next section when we look at time and consciousness. But just to finish this little section here, I want to bring back that habitation chain diagram. If you remember, we looked at in the last video. We started with the separated being, living from, so that mode of enjoyment, and distance is achieved through recollection or representation, which is made possible by the woman, who manifested with a presence which is discreetly in absence, opening up that field of intimacy. that made recollection possible, and recollection or representation produces concretely as habitation in a dwelling, the interiority of a home, an interiority that is exterior to us, it's in the world already. So that was kind of habitation. That was where we finished in the last video. Now we've gone on though through the hand. This interiority of the home, this habitation, makes possible possession and labor, and that possession and labor fitting things into a project, the plan, giving things meaning, relevance, significance in relation to me, masters the uncertainty of the future, and it masters it as a postponement or a delay. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But that then delineates separation in the form of economic independence. So basically what we've gone from is, if we start with the separated being living from in the bottom right hand corner of the diagram, we've gone now to this other form of separation as economic independence. And that is what Levinas is trying to get at in that section. It took me ages to come up with that diagram. It's just there's like one paragraph. I read it about 1,000 times and tried to piece it together from that. And it really didn't work, actually. I had to keep reading. I had to read the next section where he fleshed out what he was saying in that single paragraph. But once I did that, things slotted into that diagram quite nicely. But that's the idea, I think, with habitation, possession, labor. So let's look at the next section, the body and consciousness. Okay, this section's going to get a little bit hairy, so strap yourselves in. There's a bit of detail in this one. So the body first. The body is, for Levinas, the way we are at home with ourselves in the milieu of something other than ourselves. The body is in fact the mode in which a being, neither spatial nor foreign to geometrical or physical extension, exists separately. It is the regime of separation. The somewhere of dwelling is produced as a primordial event relative to which the event of the unfolding of physico-geometrical extension must be understood, and not the reverse. So this is just a different way of thinking about the body. We typically understand the body in terms of physics or biology, where it's just a physical object, the same as other physical objects, governed by the same laws, subject to the same rules that govern other physical objects, right? But as with all of the phenomenologists, existentialists, all of this crew, Bergson included, the body is more than this. It's not just another object in the world like other objects. It is also this. It has to be understood first as a locus around which other objects get their bearings, take their bearings in the first place. So just thinking of it in this kind of third person scientific sense doesn't get us to understand what the body is, the importance of the body in terms of in its role in human existence. So we have to understand the dwelling, the way that the body allows us to be present before we can understand the unfolding of space in terms of physics, not the other way around. And that's kind of the reversal that every one of these philosophers talk about. So the body is what it means to be independent in our dependence on the other of the element of the world. And we talked about that dependent a while ago, the way that we're both, we are both of these things in our relation to the world. So a dependence that constantly and from the very beginning influences us even though we're at the same time independent from it. We've distanced ourselves from it. So there's this ambiguity around this idea of being independent in our dependence. But that's what the body is. That's precisely what the body is. It's how this ambiguity is able to exist, to occur. And a little bit earlier, this is a few videos back, we talked about the body in relation to need. And there we said that accomplishment takes place through labor, and labor requires a body. And now we know what that means. Accomplishment takes place through labor, through possession, through taking hold of things and fixing them in relation to goals and projects and other objects, giving them this significance that kind of takes away from what they are as things themselves, but gives them a broader relevance in a greater project, the project centered on me and my needs, my desires. So that's what that is. And that whole project, that whole idea of labor and possession requires a body. It requires the hand. That's the importance of the hand for Levinas. Comes back to the importance of the body. Without the body, not as a physical object like other physical objects, but without the body as the means by which labor is possible, by which things can become part of a greater project, by which the world can be totalized with me. That's what we need. That's what the body is for us, first and foremost, before it can be just a physical thing, before we can investigate its physical properties or its biological properties. It is this force, if you like, of bringing significance to the world, totalizing the world according to all of these things: possession, labor, habitation. Okay, so we've got these two aspects to human existence: dependence, where we're immersed in the world, that mode of enjoyment, and independence, a distancing from that world, the mode of recollection. Really, I guess I've equated recollection and representation. I think the idea with recollection is Levinas is pointing to memory, in the sense that we need to be able to remember in order to distance ourselves. That capacity for remembering, for bringing the past into our present, is what it is to distance ourselves from the present. But so, in effect, it's the same thing. But there's that link to memory there that I don't think Levinas really pays much attention to, but again is very reminiscent of Bergson. So okay, two aspects: dependence and independence, and the body then is what facilitates this human existence, this ambiguity of independence, dependence, freedom, determinism, enjoyment, labor. These are all the same kinds of dualities that Levinas is pointing at here. And they're not really dualities, but the two different, I shouldn't have said that, but two different aspects, maybe, of human existence. So that's essentially what the body is, and that's the way we have to think of it before we think of it as a physical object or as a biological object. Now, what about consciousness? This is where things get messy. So, all right, the alterity of the other in the element as other, is suspended or postponed in labor or possession. That was kind of the conclusion in the last section. And this is interesting, actually. He doesn't say much about it, but he briefly raises this point. Death is the ultimate insecurity, which is postponed through this method. So dwelling, for Levinas, is mainly a postponement of death. That's the ultimate insecurity, the ultimate thing that we can't reconcile. And so through habitation, through representation, recollection, through possession, labor, this whole endeavor is crucially, or at least importantly, of all the things that it postpones, of all the uncertainties that it alleviates for us, the primary one is death. And that's basically all Levinas says about this, I think. That's all I got from him anyway on this on that. But just it's worth having that in there because that's a nice and important little point. So habitation, possession, labor, the main thing that they're postponing is death. But let's look at this idea of postponement in a bit more detail. So postponement opens the very dimension of time, Levinas says. And in fact, it is what time is, postponement. And if you remember earlier, again, going back to the section on need, where we talked about the body and time. This was a couple of videos back. We talked about need as a suspension or postponement of dependence. So there's no need in immediacy. If everything takes place, if everything happens immediately, directly, as in the mode of enjoyment, living from, then there is no such thing as need, because need requires a delay. It requires some postponement, and that's what we've got here, this postponement. And now that we've talked about labor and possession, we can see that postponement arises as a result of labor and possession. This whole process of habitation is what generates postponement. And postponement is what we call time in the last, whenever it was, and now we're just kind of fleshing out that idea a bit more. Now we're connecting postponement to labor and possession. So we've got these two aspects. We talked about this just before, dependence and independence. Dependence being immersed in the world, enjoyment in our physical bodies. Independence, a distancing, recollection, and this is the lived body, Levinas says. So we've got this kind of opposition, this contrast, this duality. But Levinas says this isn't a duality, in fact, even though we've got what seems to be a duality, a physical body which relates to our dependence to the world, and a lived body, the body that we don't encounter directly, that we kind of that we use to support, that is what's left over when we distance ourselves from that immediate engagement with the world in enjoyment, independence. So it appears like a duality. It's not a duality, Levinas says, though. The dwelling which lodges and prolongs life, the world life acquires and utilizes by labor, is also the physical world, where labor is interpreted as a play of anonymous forces. The domiciled being stands out from the things only because it accords itself a delay, because it delays the effect, because it labors. So this is, I think, a really important quote. So there's not a Cartesian duality here between recollection, which is kind of like the mind, and enjoyment, which is kind of like the physical matter. That's that direct engagement with the world. And so we've got these parallels, right, that appear to be dualities: independence, dependence, dwelling, the objective world, mind and matter, freedom and determinism. All of these are the same kinds of opposites, contraries, perhaps it's a better word. But the reason these aren't Cartesian dualities, the reason these don't make up two distinct realms, is because the first is the latter, just the latter postponed. So the mind half of all of those dichotomies isn't something separate from the physical half. It is the physical half. Just that physical half postponed. Just that physical half delayed. So he's saying, in a kind of roundabout way, but he's saying there aren't two substances here that we have to treat separately and try and understand how they fit together. All we have is the one substance. All we have is that physical, that the objective world, the matter. That's all we have. But the second, the other half of those two aspects, is just that first one delayed, postponed. And that is so Bergson to me. As soon as I read that, I just thought that's basically exactly what Bergson says about the brain. That's the brain's function for Bergson, was to inject this delay. He doesn't call it a postponement. I forget what he calls it actually, but he doesn't call it a postponement. But that's what all he says. I think he says delay, a delay from the stimulus to the reaction. That's all the brain does. It's to insert a moment of delay so that there is no longer just stimulus reaction. Now there's a break between the two. And that's all that the brain does. That's what's the main function of the brain. It doesn't produce consciousness or unextended thoughts or immaterial this or that. It just creates a delay. And that's all you need for what we call thought to arise. And that's exactly what Levinas is saying here. Of course, he doesn't talk about Bergson at all. I mean, no one, especially French philosophers, seems to even acknowledge Bergson, or when they do, it's just to say how different their philosophy is from him. It's still a mystery to me, but don't get me started on that. Anyway, that's the idea there. There's this delay. What's important is this idea of postponing something, delaying, introducing a delay into the physical. And that instead of looking for then some kind of consciousness or mind or something else, something over and above what's already in the world, now we've got the world. Now we see how the world can, or consciousness and mind can occur in the world. We don't need to inject anything else. We don't need some magical property. It's just the physical world delayed. It's when a delay comes in. It's through postponement that you get this other half of the equation. So recollection, or that capacity for distance, reflection, this is basically consciousness. And I'm just rereading what I've already written. Yeah, so this recollection or representation is essentially consciousness or mind. But it's a slightly different way of thinking about it, and in line with what I just said. Consciousness is not a separate thing we need to try and fit into a physical world. Levinas says the same thing here. Consciousness is not incarnated, it is a disincarnation, or more exactly, a postponing of the corporeity of the body. This is not produced in the ether of abstraction, but as all the concreteness of dwelling and labour. So I think that really captures the idea here. usually we try and get consciousness into the body. We've got mind, we've got body. How can we get that consciousness into the body? How can we incarnate consciousness? But for Levinas, consciousness is a postponing of the physical of the body. It's a disincarnation. So we've started with the physical. We've started with the carnal. And now it's through the act of postponing, the consciousness is coming as a result of that. Oh, that is what consciousness is. We don't even want to say consciousness arises as a result of the postponement, because that still sounds like you get something new. And that's just not the right way to think about this. Consciousness is that postponement. There's nothing else going on. There's nothing extra that we need to inject into the world. So that's what consciousness is. Another point, it's not abstract or ephemeral or it's not an analytic idea here. It's concrete. It's in the world. It's not in some abstract intellectual zone or intellectual realm, right? It's concrete. It's indwelling labor and possession. It's in the body. It's in the physical. That's where you have to look to understand consciousness, not in the world of the abstract or the intellect. Because that's exactly where the ambiguity, that dependence and independence, arises in the body. That's why consciousness arises in the body, because that's the locus for this ambiguity that is human existence. It's this point of where these things, where postponement takes place, where the direct, the immediate, is postponed to become independent, to become indirect, to become distanced. That's where all of this takes place in the body, and that's why consciousness is carnal. Levinas doesn't say that, but that's the idea. Consciousness is, we've got to look to the body to understand consciousness. It's where the body disincarnates. It's where the body steps away from, detaches from itself, from the world, through habitation, through possession, through labor. So we need the body. Consciousness can't exist without the body. That's another key point here. But we need it in order to postpone it, in order to postpone the physical. We need the physical of the body in order to postpone physicality, the physical side, the physical aspect of our lives. And I mean, this is not really new stuff. It's the basic idea is we've talked about this almost the same thing in every philosopher, most philosophers that I've talked about on YouTube, but it's just kind of fitting into a different a different framework, I guess. Levinas has a slightly different framework, but it's kind of the same idea, and I've written about consciousness quite a bit, and this is really the same idea here, just kind of in different terms. We've got different language, and fitting into a different overall theory, but we see the same idea kind of manifesting again and again. And so now we're going to link, we already have been linking time with consciousness, right, with postponement, but that's exactly where what Levinas has been doing, connecting time with consciousness. To be conscious is to be in relation with what is, but as though the present of what is were not yet entirely accomplished and only constituted the future of a recollected being. To be conscious is precisely to have time, not to exceed the present time in the project that anticipates the future, but to have a distance with regard to the present itself, to be related to the element in which one is settled as to what is not yet there. And that just kind of brings it all back, I think. We're not, to be conscious is to be in relation with what is, but we're not exceeding the present by anticipating the future. That's a direct refutation of Heidegger. That's what the future was for Heidegger. To be related to the present, this is the idea, to be related to the present as if it were the future of a recollected being. So this is capturing that idea of postponement here. The present that we live, present that we actually live through and from, is not the actual physical present, not the scientific conception of now, but it's that present postponed, that present delayed, that present lived from a distance. It's that present which is, as Levinas says, that present which is not yet accomplished. It's not a present moment that is wrapped up in itself, complete in itself. It's a present that extends beyond itself. Not in the sense that we're anticipating the future, but in the sense that the present, it's not finished. It's delayed. It's postponed. And that is so Bergson that I can't even express how Bergson it is. It's essentially duration, isn't it? This idea of postponement. It's essentially what Bergson was talking about with duration. So consciousness is a changing of our relation to the present by including this idea of postponement. And here, like I said, postponement, it sounds like a synonym for duration. So postponement is the opening of time, and consciousness is essentially time. And that has gotten us through most of that thicket, actually. So there's a little bit more to say before we wrap up this section, especially regarding the rejection of mechanism. Levinas talks about this a little bit. So labor, the grasping of the hand, is not a causal, it's not an event in a causal chain, although it appears this way to the intellect once it's complete. Once labor is finished, then it appears as if event A led to event B, which led to event C. So we read it in that way, but we only read it in that way after it's finished. The grasping, the actions of the body, is motivated by the end, not caused by the preceding action. And that's the difference. So we have to think about the grasping. Remember, everything is now undertaken with an end in mind, as part of a project, as part of a plan. So we're not doing things because something happened in the past and is now causing this event. Rather, I'm being directed by the future, by a goal. And that's what is kind of pulling me forward, if you like. And Merleau-Ponty has already said this. We talked about this with Merleau-Ponty. Sartre has also mentioned it, I think. But it's the same idea, just kind of coming through again here. I've got a quote which is interesting. I'll read this for you. The representation of the end and the movement of the hand that plunges toward it through an unexplored distance, preceded by no searchlight, constitute but one and the same event, and define a being that, while being in the midst of a world in which it is implanted, yet comes to this world from the hither side of this world, from a dimension of interiority. And that just captures that idea really well, I think. The representation of the end, so the goal, and the movement of the hand that moves me forward towards that goal through an unexplored distance, so through something that we haven't, he doesn't say it, but perhaps is even unpredictable, fundamentally, something that can't be reduced to the mechanistic interplay of forces, but something that there's nothing we could look to prior to it in order to understand what's going to happen next. It's fundamentally, if we were doing Bergson here, I'd say it's fundamentally creative, but that's the idea. And the representation of the end and the movement of the hand constitute one and the same event, not two events. And that, again, is just so, I hate to say it, but that's so Bergsonian, right? The end and the movement are one thing. They're a continuous whole. You can't break it up, and if you break it up, you get two separate things that no longer express that indivisible whole, which is the action towards the goal. But that idea captures the dependence, independence, ambiguity that the body makes possible in the world, but separated from it in interiority. So I know I mentioned Bergson a lot in that section, but there's a lot there. I think that it's very Bergsonian to me. If you've read Bergson, I think you will have noticed a lot of it as well. But interesting and great, because I think Bergson was right about all of this. So it's fine that I'm happy that Levinas picks it up. I just wish he'd okay. Don't get me started on the lack of acknowledgement of Bergson. But I think that's everything I wanted to say about consciousness and the body and time. I hope that makes some sense. It's really tough to explain this stuff, but let's move into the last section, the freedom of representation and gift. Okay, so in this section, Levinas starts talking about idealism and empiricism, both of which he rejects. So idealism is the problem. His problem with idealism is that an impassive representation cannot motivate. If all we have are ideas, that's not enough to really motivate us to action. It's not enough to generate action. We need something more to get us to the kind of the physical involvement that we see in ourselves every day. Empiricism, the problem with this is that the direct unmediated engagement with the real world through commitment, action, care, and so on, cannot give us the freedom of representation. So again, we're missing another aspect of human existence that we see in ourselves, that we have to explain, and empiricism just can't do that. So both of these, however, appear true, or it's possible to see one of these as being true only because of the ambiguity that characterizes human existence. The fact that we are both of those things, the fact that we are dependent, we're in the world directly living from, but we're also independent. We are distanced from the world. We represent the world to ourselves. So, and that ambiguity means that it's possible to take either one of those and make a convincing, compelling argument that it's the truth, when in fact neither of them really are sufficient to explain reality, specifically the fact that human existence is possible in the world. So Levinas asks here, the next question here is, how can we go beyond both of these? How can we go beyond both dependence, that engaged enjoyment, and independence, that distanced possession of things? But in order that I be able to free myself from the very possession that the welcome of the home establishes, in order that I be able to see things in themselves, that is, represent them to myself, refuse both enjoyment and possession, I must know how to give what I possess. But for this, I must encounter the indiscreet face of the other that calls me into question. The other, the absolutely other, paralyzes possession, which he contests by his epiphany in the face. So, going beyond possession requires that I be able to give what I possess. So what do I possess? The world. I possess the things, right? That's what habitation and labour was all about. How can I give this? Well, in order to give it, Levinas is saying, I must first have it challenged. The other, the absolute other, must first challenge me and my possessions before I can give them away. Why might this be the case? And I think it's because the world and the things in it don't appear as things that can be given. They don't appear as things that I possess in the first place. It's the challenge from the other who contests I and my possessions that makes me, that shows me that these things are possessions, that these are things that are available for me to give away. Without that, I'm just immersed in life, right? I'm just immersed in my labor, my possession. It's so close to me, it's so natural to me that I don't even recognize that these things, I have taken possession of these things, and I can therefore give them away. I don't even recognize it. It's just natural. It's just the natural way that we live. And that's what philosophy is. Philosophy is showing us these things. It's showing us the truth of these things. But that's what most people would say about philosophy. But Levinas is saying it's the other who shows us the truth of things. But I guess we can go one better than Levinas and say, yes, the other shows us the truth of this, but we have to do philosophy in order to see that the other is showing us the truth of it. Or else we'd all know this sort of stuff already and it would all be second nature. But it's not. We're naturally caught up in this mode of life, in this mode of possession, labor, recollection, representation. This is what our natural mode of being. It's not our original mode, that was enjoyment or living from, but this possession is so natural to us that we don't even see it as possession. It doesn't appear to us as possession. It appears to us just as the way things are. So we need to kind of, in a way, there's kind of like a double detachment here. Possession is already a detachment from living from, and now the other instigates the second mode of detachment, where now we see the things in the world that we see that we've made a possession of them. I've taken a hold of them and related them to my goals and fit them into this framework which I've created centered around me, this totality. And then now that I see that, thanks to the other, now I'm in a position to give it away, to give it as a gift. And that's what we're going to look at here. So there are two steps to this process. In the first, the other challenges the I through language. We've kind of talked about this in quite a bit of detail already. But the teaching that comes here, the first teaching, is the transcendence from which the teaching comes. In other words, the ethical. The calling in question of the I, coextensive with the manifestation of the other in the face, we call language. The height from which language comes, we designate with the term teaching. The first teaching teaches this very height, tantamount to its exteriority, the ethical. So that's the first thing we get. We get from when the other challenges us, when the other appears through language in the face, we get this, we first encounter this absolute alterity. That's the first teaching, that this absolute alterity, this transcendence exists. And what it does, though, a kind of secondary aspect, as I mentioned before, is in challenging the I and possession, it shows me the reality. It shows me that I have totalized the world, that I've centered everything on myself, and I've taken hold of the things out of this original mode of living from, and now I've owned them, and I've reduced them to instrumental objects which just get me closer to my goal, objects that I can then quantify, measure. I can put assign a monetary value to, and now I can exchange those objects with others, and so on and so forth. So that's what the other shows us by appearing as this transcendence which escapes that totality. So that's the first step. The other challenges the I through language. The second step is the giving itself. And this, and I'll just mention this because it is interesting and important, I think. It takes place in the world. Levinas explicitly notes this. All human relationships occur in economic life in a dwelling. That is to say, in a world that is possessed. And that's important to keep in mind, and it's another theme that we see in all phenomenology and existentialism. Human life is life in this world, in the concrete here and now, not in there isn't some magical, mystical realm which we can access if we meditate for long enough, or if we do some certain yoga positions or whatever, practice yoga for X number of years. We're not accessing a higher realm. There's no transcendent realm which we can break free of our mortal chains. All human life takes place in the world, in a dwelling, in economic life. So even though we recognize that this is perhaps, we recognize it for what it is. I have created the significance of things around me. I've brought them into my sphere of influence. I've made them. I've dominated them so that they serve my ends now. Even though this is the reality. It has to be that way. There is no human life without that. There is nothing else beyond that which you can aspire to. That is where human life is. And I like that. I like this acceptance that this is what it is to be a human being, and there is no heaven or nirvana or enlightenment, which is like a different way of being. That's kind of, for me anyway, I find that it's just gone down a path, I think, that's missed this fundamental truth. All human relationships occur in economic life in a dwelling, which brings in everything that we've talked about. So I like that. I think it's worth stressing, and Levinas thought it was worth explicitly noting as well. But the giving itself, what's given in the giving? It's the world. The world is given. I give the world, and I give the world to the other. The relationship with the other, transcendence, consists in speaking the world to the other. The hic et nunc, the here and now, itself issues from possession, in which the thing is grasped, and language, which designates it to the other, is a primordial dispossession, a first donation. The generality of the word institutes a common world. The ethical event at the basis of generalization is the underlying intention of language. So the world is given, I give the world to the other, and I give it through language. Speaking establishes a world in common with this transcendence that is fundamentally transcendent, that is fundamentally alterity to me. And again, it's not that there's a higher realm we can somehow ascend to if we pray in the right way. It's that it's just what the other is. The other is outside anything I can totalize. They are, as a completely independent being, they're something which I can never fully totalize. And that's all it means here. We're not talking about higher realms of existence or anything. But what I do through language is I give my world to the other. I show them the world as it is for me. And that's the gift. And it's a gift given through language, and what it does is establishes a world in common, because the other can gift their world to me as well. And so we now inhabit this shared world, and that's a really nice idea. Reminiscent again of Merleau-Ponty, who says something similar about language, the way that it sets up a world in common. In fact, he says language, which is very, very similar to that, I think. So that's awesome. And in this way, through the giving, representation attains true freedom. Truth is neither in seeing nor in grasping, which are modes of enjoyment, sensibility, and possession. It is in transcendence, in which absolute exteriority presents itself in expressing itself. Perfect quote to finish on there, I think. And wherever Levinas goes with this, I can't remember what he says. Obviously, he's trying to tie this all in with God in some way. But whatever road he goes down with that, and whether he believes in an afterlife or heaven or whatever, that's not what this is about, I think. And I think to jump to that conclusion at this point would be premature, because transcendence here is not, he's not talking about something a state we can aspire to. The transcendence here is the other. And it's through that, through them, through the absolute other, that we go beyond our own totality, in which the world and everything in it refers to me and my goals and my projects. So true truth lies beyond both enjoyment, which is a fundamental an imminent engagement with the world, that living from, beyond that, and beyond possession, beyond habitation, beyond labour, which turns everything towards me, totalizes the world. It's in transcendence, in the face of the other, and establishing a relationship with this other that is never able to fully totalize the other. It's never able to fully to catch the other define them in a set way, to kind of reduce them to anything which has relevance or significance centered around me. That's what the transcendence is here. So I really like this idea. This is a great philosophy, I think. This is a great idea. So let's have a look at a summary. So first we looked at possession and labor, and we talked about the way that this is essentially the way we take hold of the world in plans and projects. So taking hold of the world, taking hold of objects in the world, reducing them to a significance that is centered on me. This leads to an economic mode of life whereby things have value. We can assign value to things because now they have instrumental use. So now we can this opens the door to things like money. And this possession and labor requires the body, especially the hand. Not the hand as biology or science sees it, but the hand as something which lets us manipulate, lets us use objects, turn them into tools, instruments, which we can use in our projects. And that the body makes possible our ambiguous mode of existence, separated and yet immersed at the same time. Independent and dependent. All of those contrasts that we discussed, they're all made possible through this unique object that is the body. And we looked at the way that possession and labor, the result of it was it neutralizes the uncertain future of the element, the elemental. And a key idea here was postponement. And this really opened the door to a number of things. The first was time. So postponement was essentially the opening up of time. It's what it is for time. It's what time is. Postponement is essentially time. And postponement, if it helps, is basically not doing much more than Bergson's duration, that idea, delay. And postponement also opens the door to consciousness. So postponement of the body, a disincarnation, the capacity to step back from that physicality. That's all consciousness is, a postponement of that. And the way that Levinas talked about it, to be related to the present as if it were the future of a recollected being. So it's not just anticipating events in the future, but it's this creation of a distance between us and the present. It's a different way of relating to the present, relating to it as something which is not finished, as something which extends beyond the moment. So we're relating to it as if it were the future of a recollected being, not as if it were an independent moment taking place now. In the final section, we looked at the gift, and the central question driving us here was, how can we go beyond both dependence and independence? And the answer Levinas gives is by giving our possession to the other. And this happens, there are two steps here. The other challenges us, the other through the face, through the revelation of their transcendence, challenges the I and challenges the world that I possess. And the second step is we give the world that I have to the other through language. And vice versa, they give their world to me through the same thing. They open up this other way of seeing the world, and we can talk about this in Sartrean terms if we want as well, right? So now there's a sinkhole opens up. Everything has meaning for the other. The meaning is no longer just directed towards me. Things have relevance and significance to this other locus, which is different from me. It's the same kind of idea, but this is a more harmonious way of seeing it, whereas Sartre's was kind of an alienating way of seeing this process. When we do this, when we give the world to the other, we're establishing a world in common, and so that founds this a world that we can then share with this absolute other, this absolute transcendence. Okay, so hopefully that has helped a little bit. If you're reading through Totality and Infinity, I'm loving this book. The more that I'm getting into it, the more I'm liking it. I know I'm eventually going to part company with Levinas because he's ultimately, it's religious philosophy, but this stuff is I think just gold. It's gold, and especially everything coming back to the other. I think that's a really important element that is going to have to play a part in whatever form my own kind of philosophy congeals around at some point. So anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next video.